Welcome back to part 2 of ex3-pic, and this part is going to be the CSS, and this won't take that long. Now that we have our image in our page and it looks like this right now, we just want to move Ragnar Lothbrok over here, and then we're going to put a little caption underneath, but we're going to use CSS to do that so we can move it side by side, because there's no real easy way in HTML to move something side by side unless we put it in a table, and we're not going to do that. So what we're going to do, and you'll see this will be fairly easy, but we're going to put some extra tags on our IMG just to kind of surround it a little better. We're going to put a little kind of container around it in a way. So what I'm going to do is right before my IMG, and this is an HTML5 tag, it's an figure tag. So I'm going to do a figure tag. So if you put this tag in front of it here, it's going to end up here. So you're going to cut this and make sure you put it after your image tag. So I'll paste it. And then I'll also hit return so that it indents it. And I'll also hit return so that that gets indented. So you know that the image is basically inside of or a child of the figure tag. And then we're going to use styles on our figure element instead of our IMG element. It won't really change anything right now. Nothing's going to change, but we're going to do some CSS styles for figure. And where figure is if you see, it's inside of main. It's a child of main, just like H1 and just like the P's, but we don't necessarily have to put main in front of it. But I am going to put it right after main and before the H1, and I'll just call it figure because it's the only figure on the page. And I'll put its curly brackets there. Now I could do this. Remember, I could call it main figure, but there's no reason to do that because it's our only figure right now. So I'll just call it figure. And the only thing we're going to put in here, at least for now, is we're going to do something called float, and we're going to float it right. And what actually happens when we float is it gets kind of removed from the HTML flow, and it gets put to the right of any HTML that follows it. And now what follows it? The heading follows it, the paragraph follows it, the ordered list and the unordered list. And again, you should be using the HTML, not the CSS, but you can see whatever follows it here, the paragraphs, the ordered lists, that's where it's going to be. So by floating that, and you can see it did it already. It floated it to the right. It's a little up too high, so we're going to fix that. But that's what floating kind of does. It removes it from HTML flow, and it puts it to the right or floats it to the right of whatever's after it, which happens to be these things. Now, it may create some problems as you go, so you just we're going to have to tweak this a little bit. So what I'm also going to do here is move it down a little. You can see it's up a little high, and our paragraphs have kind of a padding top or possibly a margin top. So let me see what it has. Our paragraphs have, in our CSS, they have a padding top of 16 pics. So let's try that first. Let's go here for figure and put a padding top of 16 pics. And don't forget your semicolon, and then we'll see what happens. And that's a little bit better. I might even want to go a little bit more. I might want to add like maybe 4 more and make it like 20. Just to move it down a little bit more. So I'll just change this to 20. And that looks a little bit better. 20 pixels down. It lines up a little bit better. And what we're also going to do is we're going to put a caption under here. And I'll do that in my HTML. And that's something called figcaption. And that's going to be inside the figure. So figcaption is inside the figure. So I'll put it down here at child just like IMG, and I'll call it figcaption. And it'll put a closing tag right away. And I spelled it wrong, because it's caption. So let me fix that. And then inside here, what I want to do is just put whatever text I want to put in there. I'm just going to call it Ragnar Lothbrok of. And the nice thing about using figcaption is then I could use CSS styles to kind of format that. So let's see what that looks like so far. And it doesn't look like anything, so let me see what I did here. Figcaption. Let's do a file save. And there, I did a refresh. Now it came back. You can see it's a little off down here. There's some problems down here that we're going to have to fix. It's kind of throwing things off down here. So we're going to fix that a little bit. And even that size, we're going to make it a little bit smaller. So we're going to actually make a CSS declaration block for figure caption or figcaption. And what we're going to do for that is we're going to align it center. We're going to make it smaller. And we might even put it in italic. So let's make it smaller first. I'm going to do font size, maybe like 80%. We'll make it quite a bit smaller. And then I'll also make it italic, which would be font style, not font weight. Font weight you use for bold, font style you use for italic. And then I'm also going to center it, and we'll use text align center. We'll use that property and we'll give it the value of center, and that should be what we want. Let me click off of here. And that's pretty much what we want. And you can see how it's getting bumped to the bottom. And part of the problem is because it's removed from HTML flow, main doesn't really adhere to that. It actually kind of ignores how long that is. So even if this picture was longer, it would actually overlap it. So we're going to have to fix that because it's not adhering to the padding that's naturally inside there. You know, and just for example, let's say I'd be like, oh, I should just put a margin below figure or something. You know, you might say, oh, let's put a padding bottom. Maybe that'll fix it. And make it like 20 pics. You know, because that might be your first kind of instinct, is to do something like that. Put space below the figure. Well, if you do that, it doesn't really do anything here. So that doesn't work. And you might say, well, let me try margin. So I'll change this to margin. And I'll see what happens. And I'll refresh it. And that's still not helping either. So we don't need this. We can get rid of this margin bottom. What we actually have to do, it's part of the problem is actually in main. The fact that that's kind of our container. So this main style here, we're going to do something called overflow auto. That'll help us kind of contain the elements inside it, even the ones that are floating. So we're going to do something called overflow. We'll do a colon and do auto. And now you can see it looks normal again. Now it's getting the padding, the natural padding back that was there from the main element. And with autoflow or overflow auto, that kind of helps it contain it in there. So that means even if I'd made this image larger, it's going to push things down a little bit. So it'll act more as a container, and it helps kind of stop the floating anywhere else. So that's kind of what we want. So that kind of fixes things. And one thing I just want to point out too, because we're almost done with this. Another thing I just want to point out is that let's say you wanted to put a border on this photo, and you might think, oh, we'll just put it right on figure because we already have that element. Now if I go here and put a border on figure, and I'll do one so it's kind of really noticeable. I'll make it red, and I'll make it 2 pics solid. And if I did something like that on figure, what happens is it goes around the entire figure because we have this on here, and because we actually have padding on our figure, it puts the border around the whole figure, which is not what we want. And we don't want it going around the fig caption either. What we actually want it on is just the image. So if we do want it just on the image, we would really go to the image itself. Now we don't have a style for the image, so what we could do is we could even make a figure img. And what that would do is basically make a style for the image that's inside a figure, the image that's a child of figure. So we're targeting just the image. And if there's any other images on the page, that's why we want to make sure we use figure image, because it's only going to be that one. And that way, if we wanted a border on it, I'll just cut this one and I'll put it here and I'll save it. And now it's putting the border on the image itself. That's what we want. Now you don't want to keep it red unless there's a reason to keep it red. So I'll go back and I'll just make it black. And I'll save it again. But that's all we really want. So again, we only put a couple styles here. We put one for figure, and we did a float right, and we did a padding top so that it kind of lines up with the paragraphs. And we did a fig caption where we just put some text in there that described the picture. We made the font size smaller, we put it in italic, we aligned it center, and then we just put a border on an element that we called, not an element, but a style that we called figure image, because we targeted the image inside a figure. And then one thing, looking at our HTML, just to be aware of, we put our figure and our image, all that, right after the H1. So that after the headline, that's why the headline goes across here. It's not affected by it. But once the paragraphs start, the image actually floats right of the paragraph. So it floats right of everything after it, which is starting here. That's why it goes there. We could have put it up there, and you could float it to the right of the headline, but we don't want that. It looks good right there. It's a nice little nook for it. And again, we made it like 300 pixels wide, which was perfect for this kind of page. So this is all we need to do here. So we just had a little bit of CSS, a little bit of image adjustments in Pixlr to make, and we have our image on our page. Our next exercise, we're going to be making this responsive. So that'll be our next kind of step. We'll work on this a little bit more and make that responsive so that when we resize it, it'll actually kind of go down to one column and start working that way. But that's all you need to do for ex3. You don't need to do anything else. You're going to do that right in your ex2 folder. But when I look in there, I'm going to make sure that you see that I see an image in there. And then when I look at your CSS at the top of your page, I'll see that you have these in here. So that's what you're going to need to do for your ex3 pic.